Journey to God's House, chapter 28, entitled Just Beat It. So during Brock Talon's stay at Bethel, one of the most biggest albums of all time was released, and that was Thriller by Michael Jackson. Now, what made this even more of a momentous album was that Michael Jackson was at the time a Jehovah's Witness who was in good standing. So prior to the album Thriller, Michael Jackson certainly didn't have the fame that he had before that album, as that album really skyrocketed him into fame and fortune. His album songs were also played on this relatively new and unknown TV channel called MTV, Music Television. Yeah, that's what they were known for, was for music videos back in the day. But today, if you go on MTV, you can look and you see shows such as The Real World, Jersey Shore, Snooki and JWoww, Ridiculousness, 16 and Pregnant, Jackass, Clone High, Pimp My Ride, MTV Cribs, Road Rules, so on and so forth. You get the story. MTV is nothing like it was when it first came out. So Michael Jackson was not only one of the first black artists to be featured on MTV, he totally revolutionized how music videos were. He basically made them into little mini movies where previously they were just some cheesy recording of the artists. So Brock Talon goes on to mention how he met Michael Jackson once before at a Jehovah's Witness event, years before Thriller came out and years before he was at Bethel. He was at this event, this Jehovah's Witness event, and he met him in the restroom. And he said that he seemed very frightened to leave the restroom before the session started because evidently he had been hassled while he was among everyone else. I'm guessing he was a budding star at the time. So because of the way he looked and the way he sensed things were, Brock says that he was about to ask him if he was okay and if he needed any help. And of course the exchange went real quickly. He just said, all he did was basically say hi to him. Michael Jackson said hi back. And he said with a smile, hey, I'm not going to bother you. Just have a nice day. And they parted ways. And so that was his big Michael Jackson story. Big deal, right? Well, the author says why it was kind of a big deal. And later in the chapter, he expounds on that a little bit more. But it was a big deal because first it gave him perspective on celebrities and how it's not always cracked up what it's meant to be or what it's supposed to be. And second, it gave him a sense of compassion for Michael Jackson, the person. The fact that Michael Jackson was scared and frightened amongst his own people, Jehovah's Witnesses, says a lot, because the witnesses really should have love bombed him just like they would have everyone else. He was their brother. Why couldn't this poor guy just come out and mingle and talk like any other Jehovah's Witness? That's how it should be, right? Because they don't worship or honor people. So why should he be afraid of being haggled amongst his brothers and sisters? So fast forward, he's at Bethel and he drops the album Thriller. And of course, Michael Jackson always gave the Bethelites something to talk about. He always gave Jehovah's Witnesses something to talk about. I remember in car groups that would kind of come up fairly frequently, Michael Jackson talk, especially when something happened in the news. But I would imagine back in those days that this was a very controversial subject, especially when his song Thriller the music video came out for that song, because the Jehovah's Witnesses to this day will say that it is the occult. And if you haven't seen the video, it's just him being a vampire, a werewolf, whatever. A werewolf, yeah. So really, there's nothing to it. This got nothing to do with demons or anything like that. And he even made a little note before the video or after, I can't remember, saying how this is not the occult or something like that. That's how much of a controversy it was back then. So he mentions that the witnesses would always get into some heavy arguments about this. And eventually, the witnesses started off mildly talking about Michael Jackson, making fun of him, and then it got out of control. But the Jehovah's Witnesses, they knew all the rules, that unless the elders in Michael Jackson's congregation disfellowshipped him or personally announced that he was leaving the witnesses or announced that he was being reproved, he was in fact a Jehovah's Witness in good standing. Period. End of story. There was nothing more to that. But this wasn't good enough for many Jehovah's Witnesses and many Bethelites. And Brock Talon says he found this out the hard way one day when Michael Jackson decided to visit Bethel himself during the pinnacle of his success of the Thriller album. And he mentions that although there were many different ones that jumped on the hate bandwagon, he said the bulk of the Bethelite brothers who hated Michael Jackson the most were the Black brothers. I find that very surprising, as did Brock Talon. But anyways, after all the mild put-downs and so on and so forth ran out, the name-calling got very ugly. And Brock Talon says it was a lot worse than what true Christians should have been talking like, especially being at God's house. So he says the flashback of his day in the restroom with Michael Jackson came back to him, and how he remembered how he felt sorry for Michael Jackson because he couldn't even go out and mingle. And that was before he had all this fame and success. And so he started to defend Michael Jackson amongst allegations that he was gay and that he was a child molester. And he mentions the guy leading the parade of hate and ugliness was what he calls Brother Big Dog, because he was the oldest, the tallest, the loudest, and the most assertive of the guys at the factory floor who were not overseers or didn't have any power of authority. And so Brother Big Guy was the leader of the Michael Jackson hate group. And I'm going to relay a discussion that Brock Talon says happened with Brother Big Dog. So he basically pins him into a corner and tells him, do you know for an absolute fact that Michael Jackson is gay? And he dances around the question. If it walks like a duck and quacks like a duck, well, but he did not let him go. He was relentless. Kept him in that corner and made him answer one way or another. Do you have proof that Michael Jackson is gay or is a child molester? So eventually he wiggled his way out of it, because he pinned him into a corner where he could not get out. And he basically said that if he had proof that Michael Jackson was gay and that he was a child molester, that it was his Christian duty to report this to the elders. And if he did not report this, then he himself was engaging in the same things Michael Jackson, that he was accusing Michael Jackson of. Wow, good play there, Brock. Good play. So eventually the brother says, okay, no, you know what? I don't have any proof. I'm sorry, I went too far. And Brock says, all right, well, since we're friends, We're just going to leave it at this. The brother said, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to say all that stuff, blah, blah, blah. And so Brother Big Dog didn't do anything at first. He was just kind of at disbelief because it went from him being the leader of the nasty jokes and the hate parade on Michael Jackson to, did this really just happen? And Brock says, look, I like laughing and joking as much as everybody else. I didn't mind the playful teasing about Michael Jackson, just like everyone else didn't mind it. But this conversation has gotten far too ugly. And it's something that should never have been this bad amongst us brothers. I think it's embarrassing for all of us. And if the older guys in our group don't have the sense to stop this kind of talk, then I will. And so Brother Big Dog says, okay, man, you're right. We're just playing. We went too far. We'll stop. He gave him a bro hug and said, man, you're all right. And so he tried to change the subject, and that was the end of that. But that was the day Brock Talon decided to defend Michael Jackson on principle in front of his workmates. And that principle was that he was a Jehovah's Witness in good standing. I find it amazing that the Jehovah's Witnesses would find it okay to slander a brother in good standing because of his fame and fortune, but will not slander a child molester. It's against their rules to say anything bad or warn any of the other parents in your congregation if you find out someone has been convicted of child molestation. That's just twisted thinking. So eventually this story dies down. Michael Jackson moves on with his career. He does more quacky things, and each time he does, it makes Brock Talon cringe because he put himself out there on the line for this guy. Eventually, Michael Jackson did disassociate himself, which is basically volunteer disfellowshipping. You're saying you don't want to be a Jehovah's Witness anymore, and the rule at this moment is if someone disassociates, it's the same as if they were disfellowshipped for a serious sin, and no Jehovah's Witnesses are to speak to you or say hi to you unless they want to be a sharer of your sins. And he mentions that when he disassociated himself, that was a huge relief in the Jehovah's Witness community. And it was to Brock Talon also. Still, while Michael Jackson was in good standing and doing one nutty stunt after another, he would always tell himself that he sure wished that Michael Jackson would just beat it. Good night, folks.